Imagine waking up one morning to realize that most of your thoughts are not your own. They feel personal, they sound like the voice inside your head, yet, if you trace them back carefully, you discover their origins in the conversations of others, the loud proclamations of media, the subtle whispers of culture. You think you are an individual, but you are carried by a current so vast and so invisible that you rarely notice it. What if the greatest illusion of your life is that you have been thinking freely, while in truth, your reason has long been shackled by the will of the crowd? Here lies the paradox: you may be convinced that your independence is intact precisely because you conform. The more you blend in, the safer you feel. But safety is not freedom. And conformity, dressed in the costume of belonging, is the slow death of reason. Arthur Schopenhauer once described humanity as caught between the raw, blind force of the will, an insatiable striving that rules all life, and the quiet, fragile gift of reason. Yet reason, that spark we believe to be our highest faculty, rarely survives untouched when it is surrounded by the herd. The individual is tempted to silence themselves, to absorb the opinions of others, and to trade their own capacity for judgment in exchange for the comfort of collective approval. But here's the contradiction that should unsettle you: the herd mind is never actually concerned with truth. It is concerned with survival, with cohesion, with preserving the illusion that the group knows what is best. In this sense, the herd mind becomes a subtle tyrant, one that punishes difference and rewards obedience, even when obedience contradicts reality itself. Ask yourself, how often do you believe something simply because everyone around you does? How often do you silence an uncomfortable question because it threatens to isolate you? And how much of what you call you is merely the echo of countless unseen voices? There is an existential weight to this realization. Because if your thoughts are not truly yours, then who are you? If your reasoning is compromised by the pressure of the herd, then how can you claim to live authentically? Nietzsche warned of the same danger when he spoke of the last man, the comfortable, obedient figure who seeks nothing higher than acceptance, entertainment, and ease. Sartre called it bad faith, the act of lying to oneself to avoid the burden of true freedom. Jung saw it in the shadow, the dark, unacknowledged aspects of the psyche that the collective mind suppresses in the name of order. Each thinker pointed, in their own language, to a single truth: the herd, left unchecked, devours the individual's reason. And yet, there is something seductive about dissolving into the herd. To feel less alone, to share in a common rhythm, to drown your doubts in the certainty of numbers. That is why the danger is hidden. You will not feel enslaved. You will feel at home. But home, in this case, is built on sand. When the crowd shifts, so do your beliefs. When the collective mood changes, so does your sense of self. Slowly, imperceptibly, the authentic I disappears into a sea of we. And what remains is not reason, but reflex. Not choice, but compulsion. So let me ask again, are you thinking? Or are you merely repeating? This question, unsettling as it may be, cannot be ignored. Because the hidden danger of the herd mind is not simply that it destroys your reason, it is that it convinces you that you never had reason to begin with. And if reason falls, what is left to guide you? Instinct? Desire? The blind force of Schopenhauer's will, pulling you endlessly toward things you never chose, goals you never questioned, and desires that never belonged to you? The herd whispers that there is no danger. That you are safe here, among them. That there is no need to doubt, no need to think too deeply, no need to stand apart. But what if this is the most dangerous illusion of all? Perhaps the real threat is not that the herd silences reason, but that it makes you forget reason ever existed. And so, the great question emerges, the one you cannot turn away from: if you are not the author of your own thoughts, then who is? And if you are not thinking freely, then what kind of life are you truly living? This is where the journey begins. In the shadows of conformity, in the paradox of belonging, in the silent war between the herd and the individual. To understand how the herd mind destroys reason, we must uncover the hidden roots of this problem, buried deep in psychology, philosophy, and the forces that shape human identity. And it is only by walking into this darkness that we can hope to find the first flicker of light. The herd mind does not announce itself. It doesn't march into your life with banners or chains. Instead, it seeps quietly into your habits, your language, your judgments, until you can no longer tell where you end and they begin. It is invisible precisely because it feels natural. Schopenhauer argued that beneath every human action lies the blind and irrational will, a restless striving that cares nothing for truth, only for survival and reproduction. Reason, he warned, is a thin veneer laid over this primal force, a delicate mask covering the chaos beneath. But here is the trap: when individuals gather into groups, the mask of reason does not strengthen, it weakens. The will grows louder, collective, amplified. The herd does not strive toward truth, it strives toward cohesion, and in this striving, reason is sacrificed at the altar of belonging. Consider how ideas spread. A single thought, repeated enough times, gains the aura of truth, regardless of evidence. A belief becomes legitimate not by its accuracy but by the number of voices that echo it. This is the hidden problem: our psychological architecture is built for imitation. Neuroscientists have shown that our brains are wired with mirror neurons, designed to absorb and reflect the behaviors, emotions, and even thoughts of others. What feels like independent thinking is often nothing more than the neurological residue of the crowd. And yet, the irony is staggering. You believe you are reasoning, when in reality, you are rationalizing. You do not test the idea, you absorb it. You do not dissect the narrative, you repeat it. As Nietzsche observed, madness is rare in individuals, but in groups, parties, nations, and epochs, it is the rule. The herd mind, then, is not a simple collection of people. It is an emergent force, something larger and more irrational than the sum of its parts. Philosophy has long warned us of this danger. Sartre spoke of bad faith, our tendency to lie to ourselves in order to avoid the heavy burden of authentic freedom. To think independently is to risk isolation. To confront the truth is to confront despair. The herd, however, offers shelter. It tells you what to think, how to act, and even who to be. In this sense, the herd solves your existential anxiety, but at the cost of your individuality. Jung, too, saw this dynamic at work in the psyche. The unconscious, he argued, contains not only personal shadows but also the vast weight of the collective. When a society suppresses certain truths, those truths don't disappear, they fester in the shadow. The herd mind operates precisely in this repression. It buries the uncomfortable, the complex, the unsettling, and replaces them with easy consensus. What cannot be spoken is silenced, what cannot be integrated is denied. And thus, the individual is tamed. But why do we allow this? Why does the individual, with all their capacity for reason, surrender so easily? The answer lies in our deepest fears. To stand apart from the herd is to risk abandonment, exile, even death. For most of human history, survival depended on belonging. The brain has not forgotten this. Evolution has carved into us the terror of rejection so profoundly that social exclusion registers in the brain much like physical pain. You feel it in your body, the tightening chest, the anxious restlessness, the desperate need to be accepted. The herd exploits this vulnerability. It promises safety in exchange for silence, comfort in exchange for conformity. And so, little by little, the individual dissolves. Not through violence, but through seduction. The herd does not command, it whispers. And the whisper is more dangerous than the shout. Aldous Huxley foresaw this in his vision of a world where truth is not destroyed by censorship but drowned in distraction. Why burn books when people can be taught not to care about reading them? Why enforce conformity when people can be conditioned to love it? The herd, in its modern form, does not silence reason through terror, but through entertainment, convenience, and endless noise. Here we stand, then, in a world where independence feels more available than ever, yet is more fragile than ever. You can voice your opinion, but your opinion will be measured in likes, filtered through algorithms, weighed against the invisible verdict of the crowd. And slowly, you will adapt. You will not think what is true, you will think what is acceptable. This is the hidden root of the problem. The herd mind survives not because it oppresses us from outside, but because it infiltrates us from within. It colonizes our desires, our fears, our identities. We think as we are told to think, we want as we are told to want, we live as we are told to live. And because everyone else is doing the same, it feels natural. But natural is not the same as true. Schopenhauer's grim vision reminds us that without vigilance, we will forever be servants of the will. Driven by blind instinct and collective impulse, disguising it all under the thin mask of reason. And when this happens, the individual ceases to exist. You may still speak. You may still act. You may still believe. But if those beliefs, actions, and words are not your own, then who, exactly, is living your life? This is the quiet devastation the herd mind brings. Not the spectacular collapse of civilization, but the silent erasure of the individual. Not the destruction of thought, but its substitution. And once substituted, reason becomes a ghost. You remember its shape, but you no longer feel its presence. This is why the problem is so insidious. Because you cannot fight what you cannot see. The herd does not look like an enemy. It looks like family, like friends, like neighbors, like colleagues. To resist it feels like betrayal. And yet, to surrender to it is the slowest kind of death. So the question now deepens. If the herd mind has rooted itself in psychology, philosophy, and even the structure of our evolution, then how do we recognize it, and what is the cost of resisting it? The unseen consequences wait just beyond this point, and they are far more dangerous than most dare to admit. The destruction of reason does not arrive with sudden thunder. It creeps in silently, like a fog, distorting vision without anyone noticing until the horizon has already disappeared. That is the true danger of the herd mind, not that it shouts falsehoods, but that it makes falsehoods indistinguishable from truth. You feel its weight in subtle ways. When you hesitate before speaking an honest thought, fearing not whether it is true but whether it will be accepted. When you adjust your beliefs not because evidence has changed, but because the mood of the group has shifted. When silence feels safer than clarity. These are not small compromises, they are the slow corrosion of your inner life. Psychology confirms this corrosion. Cognitive biases thrive in groups, feeding on the need for belonging. The bandwagon effect lures us into agreement simply because others agree. The confirmation bias ensures we only see evidence that reinforces the collective story. The false consensus effect convinces us that everyone thinks this way, even when they don't. Layer by layer, these biases tighten the grip of the herd, until questioning it feels less like rebellion and more like madness. And yet, the tragedy runs deeper. Once reason is subdued, identity itself begins to fracture. Sartre argued that when we live in bad faith, we become actors in our own lives, playing roles written not by us but by society. We wear masks, convinced they are our faces. The herd mind thrives on these masks, encouraging you to confuse persona with self, applause with authenticity. And the longer you wear the mask, the harder it becomes to remember what lies beneath. But what happens when an entire society wears masks? History offers brutal answers. Mass movements, political cults, ideological frenzies, all arise when the herd mind eclipses reason. What begins as belonging mutates into fanaticism. Nietzsche's warning rings out here: in individuals, insanity is rare, but in groups, it is the rule. The herd not only silences reason, it weaponizes its absence, turning irrationality into a virtue. This is not a distant problem belonging to dictatorships or forgotten revolutions. It is alive in our daily lives. Consider the digital world, where algorithms amplify collective impulses, rewarding outrage, punishing nuance, and feeding the herd precisely what keeps it loudest and least reflective. Here, the unseen consequences are catastrophic. Depth gives way to spectacle. Thought collapses into slogans, arguments into memes, truth into popularity metrics. Identity shrinks to categories. You are no longer an individual but a demographic, a statistic, a consumer profile. Silence becomes compliance. Those who resist are drowned out or excluded, reinforcing the illusion that the herd's voice is universal. The consequence is not only external but internal. Anxiety rises when your sense of self is dependent on others' approval. Depression deepens when your private doubts conflict with public conformity. The more you surrender to the herd, the more estranged you become from yourself. Jung would call this estrangement the consequence of neglecting the shadow, the unacknowledged truths that the herd forces underground. But shadows do not vanish. They erupt. This eruption is often violent. Suppressed individuality finds release through self-destruction, addictions, or sudden eruptions of rage. On the collective level, it emerges as mass hysteria, scapegoating, or waves of cultural purges. When reason is destroyed, the vacuum is filled by something older, darker, and more primal, the blind will Schopenhauer described, now amplified by numbers. Perhaps the most haunting consequence is this: the herd convinces you that you are free even as it dictates your every choice. You vote, you speak, you consume, you decide, but the range of decisions has already been framed by collective forces you never questioned. Freedom becomes a performance, not a reality. And yet, the psychological trick is so effective that you rarely notice. Like prisoners who decorate their cells, we adapt to confinement, mistaking comfort for liberty. Aldous Huxley foresaw this: people would not resist control if control arrived wrapped in pleasure. Entertainment, distraction, convenience, these are the velvet chains of the modern herd mind. The existential cost is profound. When you live by borrowed thoughts, you lose the possibility of authentic meaning. Viktor Frankl insisted that meaning must be discovered, not given. But the herd offers prepackaged meanings, easy narratives that save you from the burden of questioning. They are soothing, yes, but hollow. And when crisis comes, when life demands depth, those borrowed meanings collapse, leaving you unprepared for suffering, unprepared for freedom, unprepared for life itself. So we must ask, what happens to a world where individuals no longer think, but merely echo? The consequence is not just a weakened society, but a hollowed humanity. Art becomes derivative, politics becomes theater, religion becomes ritual without spirit, relationships become performances of convention rather than encounters with truth. Life itself becomes second-hand. But perhaps the most insidious consequence is that you may already know this, and still choose the herd. Because to resist is lonely, frightening, even dangerous. It is far easier to go along, to keep your head down, to call obedience wisdom and conformity peace. And yet, beneath that quiet compliance, a restlessness stirs. Schopenhauer would call it the will's dissatisfaction, Nietzsche would call it the yearning for authenticity, Sartre would call it the weight of freedom pressing against denial. Whatever its name, you feel it, the sense that something vital is slipping away the longer you surrender to the herd. That is the hidden torment of these unseen consequences. You can silence reason, but you cannot silence the part of you that knows you have silenced it. And that awareness, buried but alive, becomes its own kind of suffering. Which leaves us at a precipice. The herd mind offers safety, identity, belonging, but at the cost of reason, authenticity, and truth. To rebel against it is terrifying, yet to accept it is soul-killing. So the question sharpens, like a blade: what does it mean to break free? Is it even possible to think independently when the herd surrounds you on all sides? And if so, what kind of courage would it demand? The rebellion begins here. Rebellion does not begin with banners or battles. It begins with a single act of defiance so small it almost goes unnoticed: the decision to think for yourself. To refuse the borrowed certainty of the crowd. To pause before repeating what everyone knows, and instead ask, but is it true? At first, this act feels fragile. You stand before the collective like a lone voice in a thunderstorm. Yet in that trembling refusal lies the seed of freedom. Schopenhauer would say you are, for the first time, suspending the blind will with the light of reason, however faint that light may be. Nietzsche would call it the first step beyond the herd morality, the first attempt to create values rather than inherit them. Jung would say you are confronting the shadow, daring to see what the collective has denied. But how do you resist a force that is everywhere, woven into language, culture, even your own psychology? The first rebellion is awareness. You cannot fight what you cannot see. Begin by questioning the impulses that arise automatically. Why do you desire what you desire? Why do you fear what you fear? How many of your opinions would you still hold if no one were watching? Viktor Frankl reminds us that between stimulus and response lies a space, and in that space is the power to choose. The herd collapses that space, rebellion reclaims it. Yet awareness alone is not enough. The second rebellion is solitude. The crowd's power is maintained through constant noise, constant comparison, constant reinforcement. To withdraw into solitude is to break the spell. Nietzsche retreated into the mountains, Jung withdrew into his tower at Bollingen, Thoreau escaped to Walden. Solitude is not an escape from life but a return to it, an opportunity to hear your own voice without the static of the herd. Of course, solitude terrifies us. To be alone is to face ourselves without disguise. But it is only in solitude that the authentic self begins to emerge. Sartre insisted that freedom is a burden, and it is in silence that you first feel its weight. You discover how much of you was never you at all, just layers of imitation. And though the realization wounds, it also liberates. The third rebellion is dialogue, not with the herd, but with truth itself. Read widely, not for validation but for confrontation. Let Nietzsche unsettle you, let Schopenhauer depress you, let Sartre disturb you, let Frankl inspire you. Seek thinkers, artists, and voices who challenge the assumptions you take for granted. Dialogue with the dead can be more liberating than conversation with the living, for the dead no longer seek your approval. But beware, rebellion is not mere opposition. To simply react against the herd is still to be defined by it. True rebellion is creative. Nietzsche's Übermensch is not the one who destroys old values, but the one who creates new ones. To break free from the herd is not to stand alone in emptiness but to begin shaping a life rooted in authenticity, responsibility, and meaning. This creation requires courage. It is easier to surrender to the crowd, to be carried along by its momentum. But courage is not the absence of fear, it is the refusal to let fear dictate. When you dare to voice an unpopular truth, when you choose integrity over approval, when you act from conviction rather than consensus, you practice rebellion. And each act strengthens the muscles of independence. History honors those who embodied this courage. Socrates drank hemlock rather than betray his reason. Galileo risked the wrath of the church to defend the truth of the cosmos. Rosa Parks refused to stand, igniting a movement that reshaped history. Their rebellions began as small acts of authenticity, yet the ripple spread until it broke empires. But rebellion need not always be heroic on a grand scale. Sometimes it is as simple as refusing to parrot a lie. As quiet as walking away from a conversation that demands your conformity. As personal as daring to live a life that does not fit the templates handed down by family, culture, or society. The herd seeks to erase these small acts, but they are the very foundation of freedom. Still, rebellion comes with a cost. To think freely is to risk isolation. To live authentically is to expose yourself to misunderstanding, ridicule, even hatred. Nietzsche himself went mad, Schopenhauer lived largely in solitude, Sartre faced constant criticism. To break from the herd is to step into uncertainty, to carry the heavy responsibility of freedom with no guarantee of applause. And yet, what is the alternative? To live as a mask, to echo rather than speak, to exist as part of a machine that devours individuality? That is not life, but imitation. Frankl, who faced the horrors of Auschwitz, insisted that even in the most dehumanizing conditions, man retains the freedom to choose his attitude, his response, his inner stance. If rebellion is costly, conformity is lethal to the soul. Here, then, is the paradox of rebellion: by standing apart, you discover connection. Not the shallow connection of herd approval, but the profound connection to truth, to authenticity, to life itself. By daring to think freely, you become more fully human. The rebellion is not against others, it is for yourself. For your capacity to reason, to create, to live with integrity. The herd promises comfort, but at the price of your essence. Rebellion demands courage, but it restores your essence. The path is difficult, but each step carries you further from illusion and closer to reality. And as you begin to see clearly, something extraordinary happens: the fear of the herd loses its grip. You realize the crowd is not an omnipotent tyrant but a fragile construct, held together by the obedience of those too afraid to question. Withdraw your obedience, and its power dissolves. The rebellion, then, is not just possible, it is necessary. Without it, you are condemned to live a life that is not your own. With it, you reclaim the one gift the herd cannot give you, yourself. Which leads us to the final question, the deepest revelation of all: if the rebellion frees you from the herd, what ultimate truth awaits beyond freedom? What is the final realization that gives life its meaning once reason is restored? The answer is not merely intellectual, it is existential, transformative, and absolute. It is here, at the edge of rebellion, that the ultimate truth begins to reveal itself. There is a moment, rare, unsettling, irreversible, when the fog of the herd lifts, and you stand naked before reality itself. No borrowed words, no convenient slogans, no collective masks to shield you. Just you, the silence, and the truth that cannot be ignored: you are free. But freedom is not what you thought it would be. It is not the applause of others, not the joy of independence, not the thrill of rebellion. It is weight. It is responsibility. It is the terrifying awareness that every choice is yours alone, and so is every consequence. This is the ultimate truth: once you break from the herd, there is no one left to blame, no crowd to hide behind, no authority to guarantee meaning. You are no longer carried, you must walk. No longer guided, you must choose. Freedom is not comfort, freedom is burden. And yet, it is the only burden worth carrying. Schopenhauer saw the world as driven by blind, insatiable will, condemning humanity to endless striving and dissatisfaction. His vision was bleak, but he hinted at a way out, through aesthetic contemplation, compassion, and the suspension of the will. Nietzsche turned this on its head, insisting that the way out was not denial but affirmation, to say yes to life in all its suffering, to will it again and again in an eternal return. Sartre sharpened it further: freedom is absolute, and we are condemned to it. To deny it is bad faith, to embrace it is authenticity. Frankl, forged in the fire of a concentration camp, gave the final shape: freedom is meaningless unless it is directed toward responsibility, toward discovering meaning even in suffering. The threads converge here: the destruction of reason by the herd mind is not merely a social problem, it is an existential one. Because to surrender your reason is to surrender the only tool you have to bear the weight of freedom. Without it, you are not living, you are drifting. Without it, you are not a self, you are an echo. And so, the ultimate truth is both liberating and terrifying: you are the author of your life. No crowd can give you meaning. No herd can think for you. No collective can save you from the responsibility of existence. If you do not choose, the herd will choose for you, but then you will not have lived, only imitated. This realization changes everything. It reframes suffering, not as punishment, but as the raw material of meaning. It reframes loneliness, not as absence, but as the necessary soil in which individuality grows. It reframes death, not as an absurd ending, but as the ultimate horizon that makes each choice urgent, each moment sacred. You begin to see that the herd's promises were always hollow. Belonging without authenticity is emptiness. Safety without truth is slavery. Approval without integrity is nothing. The truth is harder, sharper, but infinitely more alive. Life has no pre-written script. There is no grand narrative handed down by the crowd that will make your suffering bearable or your freedom easier. The story must be written by you. And in that act of authorship lies the essence of human dignity. This is not an invitation to arrogance or isolation. On the contrary, authentic individuality opens the door to genuine connection. Only when you are no longer hiding behind the masks of the herd can you encounter another human being in their reality, not their role. Only then can love be love, not performance, friendship be friendship, not conformity. By daring to be yourself, you make it possible for others to be themselves too. And so, the ultimate truth is not simply that the herd destroys reason. It is that reason, once reclaimed, allows you to stand in the storm of existence with courage. To say yes to the chaos, yes to the suffering, yes to the uncertainty, and still create meaning. This is the victory of spirit over herd, of freedom over imitation, of authenticity over illusion. The path is difficult, yes. To think freely is to risk loneliness. To live authentically is to carry weight. But the alternative is worse, to live as a shadow, to die as an echo, to never truly have been alive at all. The herd whispers, don't think, don't question, don't resist. But the truth roars, you must. Because in the end, there is only one question that matters: will you live as yourself, or will you die as the herd? The choice is yours. It has always been yours. And in that terrifying, magnificent freedom lies the very essence of being human.